In this exciting episode, we get a poignant example of why you should be wary of pipe-smoking Englishmen with artistic beards in dingy studio apartments. It's Season 1, Episode 21 of Perry Mason, The Case of the Green-Eyed Sister. Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy, and my purpose here is pretty simple: provide an audio companion to the greatest legal drama in television history, Perry Mason. I plan to do a pod for every episode of the television series, and as time permits, I'll look at some of those made-for-TV movies too. I'll be working through the series in the order in which the episodes were aired. Each episode, I'll give a brief refresher on the plot, and if the episode was based on a novel, I'll compare the book with its television adaptation. Next, I'll list some key pieces of trivia as well as tackle the episode's main theme. We'll feature a Perry proverb, a moment of wisdom from the man himself, and then we'll finish with a post-case water cooler where, just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can rehash the ins and outs of their adventures. But first, to the law library! Each week in the Law Library, we return to prior episodes to refresh our memories about Perry's past so we can find fresh precedents for future cases. In this episode's visit to the Law Library, we consider Paul Drake's need for cash. In the case of the Lonely Heiress, Paul finances come up twice. First, he wants to rush down to the bank to cash Edmund Lacey's hot check.
Aren't you forgetting something? Oh? My fee.
Would you like to dictate the rest of those letters?
No. I gotta get the bank before the ink dries.
The episode even ends with the guy stopping to pick a quarter up off of Perry's floor. Is Paul that hardcore of a spender or just a miser? We're never told what Drake makes working for Mason, but we do have this classic moment from the case of the crooked candle.
Perry, I gotta make this fast. I forgot to cash a check. Could you let me have 50?
And here's another moment where Perry rubs Paul's face in his limited budget.
My mistake, Dylan. He hasn't done badly at all. Steak sandwich.
But when you consider that it's Perry who's often having to buy Paul a clue, I don't feel so bad. In the last episode, Paul got to split Della's dinner with Perry. I think he'll make it. Without further ado, let's get to the plot of our episode. The Case of the Green-Eyed Sister. 10 years ago, aging patriarch Ned Bain made his fortune from a wildcat oil strike. Unfortunately, his backing money came from a Texas bank via larcenist J.J. Stanley. Private Detective Arthur West has tracked dipsomaniac Stanley down, and he's using the Skid Row denizen not only to blackmail Bain, but also get a reward from the Texas bank.
My name's Arthur West, private investigator.
Well, if you're not with the law, what do you want?
$50,000. You embezzled from the Texas National Bank.
That was 10 years ago.
Yes, I know it was, and you had a partner, Ned Bain. He's a pretty big man now, highly respected. I always wondered how Bain made his money. Didn't know he was financed by the Texas National.
I don't get it. Spell it out.
Bank's like an elephant. It never forgets. They'd pay me plenty to know how Bain made his money.
And why don't you tell him?
Because Bain would pay a lot more. Quite a lot.
While Ned fears for his own reputation, he's worried about what Stanley's charges could mean to his family. He has two daughters, the beautiful Sylvia and the dowdy Harriet. The latter has finally found a fiancé, albeit an effete, listless, and bearded one named Addison Doyle. But Harriet fears that a scandal could wreck her one chance at happiness.
Besides the concern for my father, I'm afraid that Addison will call off the marriage if there's a scandal.
Don't you think you're underestimating yourself and your fiancé?
Sometimes I'm very realistic.
She has already noticed Addison paying more attention to Sylvia than to her, and her fears are well-founded, for when J.J. Stanley ends up, Harriet gets charged with the crime, and and Addison's already tepid affections further cool. Of course, those woeful relationships have their positive counterparts. For the first time in the series, we see Della working behind Perry's back to get him to take a case. When we first see Perry, he's about to go to Europe to attend a legal conference, but Della empathizes with the distraught Harriet too much to let Perry go.
And if her father should be implicated, her fiancé walks out.
That's right.
Maybe she'd be better off. Besides, there's plenty of other men in this state she can choose from.
Not for Harriet Bain. She signed a retainer. There you are. It's all in the notes.
All right.
After all, Della isn't taking advantage of Perry. She's only directing him in the direction his affections would normally turn. Paul Drake, of course, provides a sharp contrast with the ruthless West. Drake manages to track down key files for Mason, and his loyalty is never in doubt. West, by contrast, works both sides against one another in order to double the profits. He works for no one but Arthur West.
Arthur West. Boy, she'll need plenty of help if she's mixed up with that character.
You see?
Yeah. Apparently, the head of the Paul Drake Detective Agency doesn't think much of him.
I don't. He's as smooth as a rattlesnake and twice as deadly. He makes a show of trying to beat down the blackmailer's price, acts for the victim, delivers the payoff, and charges the client a nominal fee.
So he gets paid both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Fittingly, the last time we see West, he's being arrested for J.J. Stanley's murder. But Perry knows that while West is a blackmailer, he's not a murderer. He has his sights set on Addison Doyle, the schnook of a fiancé who has left Harriet midstream.
I've just come from the jail. A visit from you might have been helpful.
Oh, skip the violins, Mason. My engagement with Harriet is quite unofficial. In the circumstances, it's better that way.
Isn't Joe walking out on Harriet a little hard on your conscience?
Doyle wants money, and the $25,000 worth of blackmail Ned Bain was going to give J.J. was the crime's motive. Sadly, that leaves our defendant in the lurch. Harriet wasn't fooling herself. Sylvia is better looking than she is. However, the scriptwriters lead us to think Sylvia's looks are inversely proportional to her morals, when as it turns out, she knows Addison is a twit.
Paul, Sylvia Bain wouldn't have had Doyle as a gift. All she wanted was to break his hold on Harriet.
The case's key forensic fact turns out to be post-mortem lividity, the temperature at which a body cools after death. Addison crammed JJ's body into a freezer to throw the police off the scent, and Perry cracks that freezer and the case wide open. The episode's closing bit fails to give us any real closure. Perry admits that Ned Bain's crime has set him up for a civil suit that threatens to take any and all money he received from the shady oil deal.
Although the statute of limitations has run out on his crime, if the bank brings a civil suit, they can recover the money he took, plus any profits he made as a result of his embezzlement.
Crime has its consequences, and this is a devastating blow, especially for Ned, who is in such poor health. Moreover, it compromises Harriet's and Sylvia's future. Della takes Harriet to the salon for a makeover that leaves Paul and Perry goo-goo-eyed. Harriet's traveling to Europe too, and apparently Perry will be her chaperone.
Taking the polar route to London by any chance?
Why, yes. Della managed to get me a seat on the plane.
What a remarkable coincidence. Well, Miss Machiavelli?
Well, with this new hairdo and new outfit, girl needs an escort.
She had better start picking up some rich men, however. Her father's funds are gone. Let's hope the green-eyed sister can be a good nursemaid to Daddy in the meantime. Now let's compare the television plot with the 1953 novel of the same name. Once again, there's a load of differences between the book and television adaptation. Number one, the green-eyed sister. It's Sylvia in the book who consults Perry. That's right, not the dowdy one. And Sylvia's a full sister, not just a stepsister. And she's a Mrs. Fix-It, but she's also a widow. Whew, that's a lot. Number two, Addison Doyle. Yes, he's in the book, but no, he didn't do it. Yes, he has a job. It's as an architect. And yeah, it looks like he's dumping the dowdy sister for Sylvia, But unlike in the show, he didn't meet Sylvia first. Number 3, the sleazy detective. Here he's named George Brogan, not Arthur West, and there's every indication that he was in on the original bank robbery too. In the indicting tape, Perry discovers that in the book it is a splice job. Number 4, Ned Bain. Again, different than on the show. 1, he didn't have anything to do with the bank robbery. Number 2, he dies the night after J.J. Fritsch in the book dies. So there's no dramatic testimony on his part. Number 5, Hattie Bain, a.k.a. Harriet from the book. She's in the book for approximately 3 seconds. Perry defends her all right, but his real client is Sylvia. She gets off thanks to Perry solving the case, but there's no transformation. And number 6, Brother Bain. That's right, Harriet and Sylvia have a brother. He's an anthropologist who's married into money and likes to go globetrotting, and he's the one who stabbed J.J. Fritsch in the back with an ice pick, then used his rudimentary scientific knowledge to fiddle with the body temperature and throw off the autopsy surgeon's calculation of the time of death. The book is solid and almost twice as long as a normal Mason mystery, but the episode is better, mainly because it sees that Harriet, the Dowdy sister, is the real key to the story. You can't have an also-ran client without compromising the emotional resonance of the case. Now, let's get trivial, shall we? But first, to the law library! Each episode in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. A Paul is a subject worth investigating more. A Della is something about a particular character in the story. And a Perry is something we learn about our main character. Our Paul this week concerns the statute of limitations. Ned Bain is guilty of participating in the Texas bank robbery in the television episode, and Berger wants him to confess to that on the stand. Here's his inducement.
Statute of limitations has expired on the crime. You can answer without incriminating yourself.
This week's research prompt: what are the statute of limitations on major robbery in Texas? How many years had to have passed for this crime to go from being a criminal to a civil case? Our Della this week concerns Robin Hughes, the man who played Addison Doyle. He of the literary affectations.
I gather your writing hasn't been very profitable.
For a man like myself, with little talent, a beer income but champagne tastes, the label writer has certain value. A few sheets of paper, battered typewriter, the beard. Work wonders with the impressionable sex.
All you need to know about this dude is that 1, he actually played the devil in a 1960 episode of The Twilight Zone. Number 2, he's in a bad 50s movie called The Thing That Couldn't Die, wherein he's the titular thing and, surprise, he ends up dying. And number 3, 1958, the year this episode aired was quite a year for him. He starred opposite Rosalind Russell in Auntie Mame. He was the title character in the aforementioned The Thing That Couldn't Die, and he was a pipe-smoking murderer in Perry Mason. We'll see Hughes again in The Case of the Buried Clock. Our Perry this episode concerns Perry's knowledge of the pertinent criminology literature, namely Dr. Gross's criminal investigations.
I know that you suspected Doyle when you saw a copy of Dr. Gross's criminal investigation in his apartment. But what was in the book that clinched things for you?
It cites an identical case of retarding body temperature by freezing.
It was one of the things that put Perry onto Doyle, and Gross's book was first published in 1893 and was considered a landmark in the field of criminology. Perry's out here putting textbook knowledge to use in the field, mainly by noticing if ordinary criminals are reading a book like Gross's. Way to go, Perry! Our theme for this episode is Green Eyes. In the episode, we wonder just who is this episode's titular green-eyed sister. We don't get descriptions of either Harriet's or Sylvia's eyes. Black and white television doesn't really help clear things up. Is the green metaphorical for jealousy or literal? The episode leaves its title deliberately ambiguous. What we know for sure is that neither sister should have to stay with the faux bohemian Addison. And Perry catches him red-handed trying to abscond with the blackmail money. Sylvia, Perry later reveals to Paul, was only interested in removing Addison's poisonous claws from her sister's heart. The show implies Harriet's left with her looks alone. At least gold diggers like Addison won't pester her. Instead, she'll be the one digging. Perhaps the titular green is neither jealousy nor a literal color. Perhaps it's cash. Now it's time for a Perry proverb. Look at Perry giving out relationship advice over here. Here he is offering a warning to murderer Addison Doyle.
Let me give you a word of advice. Go easy on the changeover to Sylvia. It might backfire.
Oh? How?
She has very red claws. She knows how to use them.
No, you can't kid a kidder. This is a proverb that means the opposite of what it says. Let's call it Perry irony. He means that Doyle's the one with the claws, i.e. ice pick, and that he knows how to use it, i.e. he's the murderer. Sylvia's good, Addison's bad. Notice that Perry says all this while holding the book that presumably confirms for him the fact that Addison is guilty. Hans Gross's criminal investigations. If you're a murderer and Perry's giving you advice that says beware of someone else, you're probably the problem. Now let's grab a swig from the water cooler.
There is one thing I don't understand.
Go on, Paul.
Thanks so much to those of you who gave me feedback on the last episode. My Aunt Myra located the other two actresses who played Paul Drake's secretary Margot, Anne Bellamy and Paula Cortland. Way to go, Aunt My. And she also asked 3 questions, which I'll try to answer. 1. Does Della ask Perry questions in the novels that lead him to the solution? And the answer is nope. The book is much more clandestine about how Perry reaches the final solution of each crime. The television show turns Perry's key discovery into a dramatic moment. And note, this is true too of the confessions, which are almost never in the books, but are always there in the show. Number 2, regarding the case of the Lonely Heiress, how did Perry solve the crime when the murder weapon was a knife rather than poisoned champagne? And the answer is that Perry figures out a weird fingerprint thing that implicates the offending party. It's really too complicated to get into. Just trust me when I say it has to do with fingerprints. There's no champagne bottles and no trips back to the scene of the crime. And number 3, Aunt Myra asks, did Gail Patrick Jackson object to the frequent changes to the book? And the answer is again, nope. Now, remember in season 1 and throughout the series run, Earl Stanley Gardner had the ultimate say. Gail Patrick Jackson was simply relaying most often Earl Stanley Gardner's wishes. It was actually Earl Stanley Gardner who wanted the final makeover scene for Harriet in this episode's denouement. So, no, Earl Stanley Gardner was well aware of all the changes they were making to his books, and he was fine with it. As always, I'd love feedback about this particular episode of the podcast or the podcast in general. Was there something about this week's pod that you'd like to comment on or something that you'd like to correct? You can leave comments on the pod's website or email me at theperrypod@gmail.com. You'll find those links in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this pod journey. Next time, we've got an airplane pilot who likes a nip of the sauce, his miserly wife who runs a hamburger joint, a man with a photographic memory, and a nurse and her paramour on the run from the law. It's the case of the fugitive nurse. Join me, won't you? Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat.